Jake's running for the place.
Good afternoon. Oh, my mic's off. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Welcome to the January 10th meeting of the MAPC, and we would like to call for public announcements.
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
Okay, with that, we'll move forward to agenda item number 1, which is approval of the prior MAPC meeting minutes from December 6th. And I see we have Mr. Florence will be abstaining.
For approval.
Second.
Whatever. Oh, that's echo in here.
Who made that motion? Okay, motion made by Mr. Joe Johnson and seconded by, what did you say?
John McKay.
Mr. McKay.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Your mic's still not working very well.
My mic still not working very well. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, you're fine.
All right, moving on to, are we good?
1201.
1201. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 2, consideration of subdivision committee recommendations. Item 2.1, sub 2018-00013, final portion of overall preliminary plat for Rocky Ford 3rd Edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent. Item 2.2, sub 2018-00042, one-step final plat, Clear Creek 3rd Edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent.
That we approve by consent items 2.1 and 2.2.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Green, a second by Mr. Hartman to take these items on consent. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 13-0. There are no vacation items under agenda item number 3, so agenda item number 4, public hearings, case number CON 2018-00043. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent. Case number CON 2018-00044. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent. Item number 6, case number CUP 2018-00051. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Mr. Foster, we will hear this case. Agenda item number 7, CUP 2018-00053. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Mr. Foster, we will hear that case.
I move for approval of item 4 and 5. Second by consent.
Who made the second? Okay, I have a motion to take those items on consent by Mr. Joe Johnson, a second by Mr. Florence. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 13-0. And with that,
Pick up coffee.
you did want to hear the whole case number 6, item number 6, the case, right? Yes, that's what I thought. Mr. Year Out, thank you for presenting today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave Yearout with planning staff. This is CP 2018-51. The application is a request to amend the Prairie Pond Plaza Community Unit Plan. The property in question is what's being combined and proposed to be created as Parcel 1, which would cover most of the northern portion of this land area. For those familiar with the site, and you'll see in a second, we're at 143rd Street East and Kellogg. There's a quick trip on the corner that would be on the northeast corner of that intersection. This is the aerial of the site, and you can see the land area that's being included within this request. The future land use shows this as a future employment area within the city. Here's the drawing showing the CUP property. It's now proposed to be Parcel 1 as outlined in the staff report. We're combining parcels because there's been a number of things happen over the years, and the large area that's left out, that's north of Kellogg Drive in this area, is actually owned now by the city, as taken as part of the ultimate right-of-way for future Kellogg improvements. And so that is now private and are owned by the city and not included within this application. The application is to change the uses permitted on Parcel 1. The intent would be to go to a self-storage warehouse complex. This is the submitted site plan as discussed within the staff report. You can see as laid out in here, we have a series of buildings proposed on the property. The primary access will be off of 143rd Street. The city has confirmed that they would not allow any access off of Kellogg Drive, even though it does extend all the way to the east property. But there would not be any access points except for an emergency or the second access at the very far east end of the property. The office would come in off of 143rd Street. All the individual buildings that would be located would be accessible through internal circulation patterns. The big glitch in the overall design is obviously the large drainage structure that exists at that location, and you can see that in the aerial. Go through a series of slides real quick. We're looking north. We're at the very just off 143rd Street, looking on Kellogg Drive and looking north, and you can see the existing masonry wall that's adjacent to the residential development to the east. Another shot of that particular property. Looking again, we're still looking at the site. We're a little further in on Kellogg Drive, but we've not reached the area of the drainage structure. This is further south, we're looking from Kellogg Drive over the drainage structure. You can see the detention, or the pond that's here. Again, the wall continues clear across the northern end of the property. This is a shot taken kind of at the east end of Kellogg Drive. You can see the existing wall ends at this location. This is the east property line. There is a tree line that exists there. This shot also shows the major power poles that Westar has crossing the property. And if you'll recall from the site plan, that is in this location. Of course, the overall plan would work around those poles. No buildings would be built in that area. That's a shot that's at this location. We're out here on 143rd looking east, and you can see the ponds right in here. The existing wall ends at this location. This is the east property line, and Kellogg itself is out here where all the cars are. So that's Kellogg Drive, and we're looking back west, so it gives you an idea of what that looks like. All of this land right on the right-hand side is part of the city-owned property that's future right-of-way. And part of the reason for the unknown entity of what's going to happen is because this particular stretch has not been designed and final approved by KDOT, so nobody knows for sure exactly what's going to happen at this location. And I think that's the end. Well, that's a shot going back in. This is the Integrity car lot within, and you can see the canopy over where the Quick Trip is right behind that. So with that, I'm going to go back to the site plan. As that noted in the staff report, the recommendation is for approval, subject to meeting all the conditions. There are a couple of things that will need to be addressed. One is the setback issues. If you look real closely here, you can see it says 30 feet. It would be, the Unified Zoning Code requires a 40-foot setback. And then there's also needing to be a landscape buffer, which would have to be shown on the plan along the north and east side of the property. So I'll be happy to address or answer any questions you may have at this point.
Mr. Richardson.
Dave, the landscape buffer would be put on the south side of the masonry wall, is that right?
Yes, that's what the ordinance requires.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Foster.
Just two questions, Dave. Number one is, now that I'm seeing that Reserve A and you described it to us, does the Reserve A go with the city property, or is it tied to this?
I think it's, yeah, no, it's not in this application, not in this property, I don't think. So, and Mr. Avey said he can answer that when he gets up here.
Second question relates to that buffer, and on page 3 of the staff report says, staff does not support the waiver of these standards, and I'm assuming that's tied to the buffer?
Yeah, there's a number of, the whole list of standards is identified in the staff report, and there's 19 of them in there, and the notation in the CUP identifies that the request, it says they'll meet those standards, and we're not supportive of modifying any of those standards as outlined in the staff report.
Thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson.
On, Dave, on condition, or general provision number 14 on screening, clearly says a masonry 8-foot wall on the north side, simply says a wall on the east side. Could we interpret that to also be concrete or not?
Yeah, the intention, and I think the intention is it will be a masonry wall on the east side as well.
I'd suggest
we need to
we
clarify
clarify
that,
that
yeah.
in the final document.
Okay,
By definition, a wall is masonry, a fence is wood. but-
Thank you. All right. Guess that solves that.
Other questions from the commission? You have a question, Mr. Green?
Well, in the staff report, it says under number 4 that the fence, when required, shall be solid, semi-solid construction or constructed to prevent the passage of debris or light material constructed of either brick, stone, architectural tile, masonry units, wood, or other similar material, not including woven wire.
Well, it's just by definition, a wall, it requires masonry, and a fence is wood or something other than masonry.
That's in the Unified Zoning Code.
Any other questions? Mr. Richardson?
So to clarify, the CUP provisions would be the one that would be the final on
Yes.
this, so we'd be using the
And we
word
need
wall.
to,
Yeah.
we'll clarify that
Yeah.
in final documentation.
Okay, if no other questions from the commission, I'd ask the agent or applicant to come forward. And you have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, Russ Avey, agent for the applicant with Boffman Company. A few quick clarifications here from the discussion that, from the questions that the Planning Commission had. Our expectation, since we are asking for 2 waivers of the 19 different standards, we're asking for 2 waivers. One, since we are deviating from what we typically see in self-storage units where we line the perimeter of the site with buildings, with small little landscaped gaps in between those buildings. Here, this development, they are accustomed to having all 4 sides of the building accessible for storage, so they are accustomed to their design of pulling that off 30 feet off of the property line. With that design, if we have overhead doors facing a residential area, it triggers a 40-foot building setback. And so we are asking for that waiver. And we're also asking, as Dave mentioned, a waiver of the 15-foot landscape buffer that would otherwise be required within our property. So it'd be on the south side and the west side of the wall and future wall. And we're asking for those 2 waivers for several different reasons. And some of them are site-related and some of them are operational-related. But some of them are related to the actual limitations that we have on this somewhat unique shaped commercial parcel. So clearly, in 2005, when we zoned and completed a CUP on this project, we expected this to function like any other intersection node commercial center. Through the unknowns of the design of this section of the East Kellogg Expressway, we have worked with Mike Armour of city staff. We've worked through KDOT. We've actually been part of the design team. Whether or not there's going to be any remnant property left over from the design, we don't know. So we are constrained by the fact that we only have access to what is shown in orange. There again, we are prohibited from utilizing or having access onto Kellogg, this existing Kellogg Drive, over the development or until the development of the expressway section here. So really, in order to maximize the site, we are going to need to pull these buildings off of the property line to have access to the north face of these buildings. And in order to meet the north-south distance constraints, we are asking for a 10-foot waiver of that 40-foot setback. To answer your question about the wall, there's an 8-foot existing screening wall. We expect to continue that same style of wall, 8-foot masonry fence along the east side. You'll notice on one of the site slides, we have a double staggered row of evergreen trees that are on the east property owner's property. And then we had that one major utility pole. That wall would go in between the existing hedgerow and that particular wall or that particular pole along the east line. So we felt that by the screening that's in place and the screening that we're going to install along the east property line would be more than necessary to offset whatever a 15-foot screening buffer would otherwise provide. There's going to be approximately 130 to 150 feet between the residents to the north and our buildings to the south. So in looking at it from a practical standpoint on this particular piece of ground, we felt that those 2 modifications of the standards were justified and worth asking your permission for. Clearly this is going to be a less intensive use than what's already permitted on the site. Quite frankly, with the right-of-way taking, and the existing 40-foot West Star easement running through almost dead center of the property limits it, quite frankly, for any other type of commercial use. At least this presents a very feasible project, projects that is needed in the area, a project very much similar to ones that we've done throughout this area. The landscape buffer that we're talking about modifying has been modified on our nearest project at 127th and Central twice, without any loss of property value or any other type of negative impact incurred to the residences abutting that site. So here, we feel there's enough things in place, natural features. You could see on some of the site pictures, you couldn't see a house to the north or to the east of our property, and there's good reason for that. There's existing trees. That development's been around for decades. So again, I think the two things that we're asking modifications for are reasonable, and will stand for any questions that you may have.
From the commission. Mr. Hartman.
Along the north property line, what existing landscaping is there?
There is nothing on the south side of the wall. So
How about the north side?
forgive me if, well, I might try to find an aerial here. This is going to be a poor picture as well. One of the issues, Mr. Hartman, that we have, again, is this 15-foot landscape buffer would be located within on top of a 20-foot utility easement. So the natural, the maintenance requirements of that would be somewhat precarious, I think, going forward. So we have a 20-foot utility easement on our property, and to the north of that, we have a 5-foot wall easement, which is the location of the wall. And the subdivision to the north has a series of overhead lines and a 10-foot utility easement on their property. So when I'm talking about existing vegetation, none of that existing vegetation, north or east, exists on our site. But clearly it exists on the properties to the north.
Are there utilities in that easement?
There will be sewer.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson.
Russ, back to the site plan for a minute, if we could. The two things that seem to be keeping you from moving the whole set of buildings to the south. One is the 35-foot setback there along Kellogg Drive. Is that a fair statement?
It really goes beyond that, Mr. Richardson. We could probably work around that. Our main issue here is we only have about 8 feet between us and that West Star easement.
Okay.
The West Star easement, as it sits today, is a 50-foot wide easement. They've granted us a 10-foot modification along the north side of that easement to try to fit this in. So I've spent about 6 hours trying to get this thing situated. So,
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify that. Then down in the southeast corner there, that block that's out of it along the dotted line, is that, you can't use that for some reason to move the whole thing south?
So, okay, over here, yeah, there would be that ability. It could be moved south. Again,
But you've got an easement there you got to go across in order to do that. Okay.
This is you can kind of see the faint outline here.
Right.
My apologies. I've done this so long, my eyesight's going. But this is the existing platted Lot 6. The city owns 3/4 of that lot. So this is a remnant easement that you'll see this easement vacation probably within the next 6 months, right? If this project gets approved. So what we're showing here is just a remnant of a lot, but that really wouldn't impact the site design short of getting that vacation approved. Theoretically, we could move those units down, but the issue is still with this West Star easement. We can move these 6 units quite freely around this envelope.
But that's not the problem.
We still can't pull these things down necessarily.
Oh, okay, great.
Is 40 feet here and 30 feet here. We're simply asking for 30 feet.
Thank you.
What kind of screening, fencing, is going to be on the west and then the southern end, and then around the retention pond? Is the retention pond all going to be located inside?
So the retention pond is going to be somewhat tricky, and that was a question earlier. We, along with the owners here, the entire commercial plat has obligations to maintain Reserve A at the onset. Clearly, there has been right-of-way takings, so we will be left as owners of the remaining balance of this property responsible for this portion of Reserve A. The city, it could be KDOT, maybe 4 years ago, obtained a drainage easement for everything down here. So this is under a separate KDOT drainage easement, because clearly there's a drainage channel that goes north to south through here. They've protected their interest in that drainage system by getting an easement. So we would still be responsible for the pond maintenance at this location here. You'll notice that there's really nothing planned here, not only because it doesn't allow itself easy design, because it's a limited building envelope, but there also may be future plans for utilizing an expansion of that pond here. So that's why you're not seeing anything here. So Reserve A, that pond would be our responsibility. We would have a fence, probably not a wall, but a security type fence, wrought iron or otherwise, along the south portions here until we meet up to the screening wall. Along here, it would be wrought iron, I would imagine, like nearly all of them are. Plus the landscape ordinance we would have street trees and screening trees along 143rd Street per the landscape ordinance.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson?
Well, I would just make a comment. This has been, I think Russ has been pretty kind about how this whole property here has been, if you will, treated by KDOT and others. There was approvals and then unapprovals and all kinds of things have gone on here, and this looks to me to be a pretty reasonable, benign compromise for the neighbors, certainly to the north, in terms of inactivity, because this has been just a sort of a running battle, I think, over a number of years with KDOT, with them ending up, I think, wishing that Quick Trip, none of that was there to begin with.
Right.
They came back at a later date and said, oh, by the way, we need all this right-of-way now, after the developer put the frontage road in and all that, at pretty substantial expense to put that road in there, and then they decide, no, we don't really want you to do that. So,
And I think it led to a situation, Mr. Richardson, where at least the city of Wichita has gotten pretty sick and tired of dealing with it as well. We were told on 3 different occasions, 2 of us were told on 3 different occasions that line is a hard line because we were desperate to try to pick up any amount of surplus land down here that the city would own. And they're not even going to entertain offers probably until 235, 135, K96, that north section is fixed. So a decade from now.
yeah, I won't be driving that. So.
All right, any other questions from the commission?
Yes, sir. We have not.
Mr. Florence, can you lean up to the mic and repeat your question, please?
I
Thank
was
you.
asking whether or not they had any discussions with the residents to the north of that development.
Thank you.
Mr. Florence, no, I have not had any conversations with those residents. I think it was just yesterday maybe that staff first heard any indication of concern or curiosity from the neighbors. The applicant, or I should say the contract buyer, Mr. Howell, has contacted and discussed the project with the landowner to the east. We share some common, you'll see down here, and it's not really much of a point of contact of concern, but when the city acquired the property, they solidified access controls. We only have one 60-foot area to put a 30-foot drive in here, and only a 150-foot area to put a 30-foot drive emergency access here. This gentleman's driveway comes down to a point here on Kellogg, so we worked since 2005, 2008, 2013, and here now in 2019 with that gentleman, mainly because of his concerns with access. I'm sure that he probably doesn't want commercial nobody wants commercial uses around them, but we have talked with that person on this.
Richardson.
So is that how you, I mean, it shows on that drawing, emergency access. Do you have an easement across the city property there for emergency access? Or are you going to use the neighbor's driveway?
I'm trying to think what the instrument was. I believe the city acquired all of this property and then sold this portion to Westar, to Kansas Gas and Electric Company, technically. So during that sale, the city, being the owner, put not really a deed restriction, it was a separate restrictive covenant that talked about access controls. It eliminated a whole host, can't have the casino here. It eliminated a whole series of additional land uses that could not go here. So nightclubs, sexually oriented businesses, casinos, or any other type of gambling establishments, vehicle salvage yards. The city put basically what would amount to a restrictive covenant or a deed restriction on this property when they sold it to KGE, and those would float down to us as well. And so it doesn't really describe too much about how we would have to work with engineering and public works on getting that access. It just grants us access to a future Kellogg Drive. At some point in the southeast, we have 150 feet to play with, but we can put one drive there and then one drive in the extreme northwest corner. And not that anybody's asked, but if you're familiar with the exit ramp for Mays Road, you'll know that you have about 1,500 feet of access-controlled off-ramp. And then it breaks into driveways for Quick Trip and the car wash, et cetera here. That design is the preliminary design that I had seen. So we have an exit ramp that comes and really it bypasses all of our frontage for any type of access. So that's why we were hoping that Kellogg Drive in its current state would at least partially stay open, but that's not the case either.
Questions from the commission?
Question, Russ, are the units they're proposing in here just one-story type storage units?
One-story hipped roof composite shingles is what they predominantly use. We had done, they had supplied me with some examples of, I think, an El Paso, Texas project and maybe a Colorado Springs project, but they are one-story, 4,000 square foot maximum buildings with hipped roofs and
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Russ. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
I should note, if you would, that they're asking for waivers of the supplementary use regulations. It's number 4 and number 6 are the two areas where they're asking for relief from.
I move for approval with the waivers, including the waivers of 4 and 6.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Green. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 13-0. Mr. Uriat, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. CP 2018-53 concerns a modification to the Brandt property. CUP, we're roughly located at 13th and Mays Road. On the southwest corner, you can see from this outline on top of the zoning district, the property which is in question on this modification. The CUP covers all of the property at that corner, but the amendment only applies to this parcel, and you can see from a subsequent slide why. The zoning on all this is LC, limited commercial. This is an aerial that shows, and this particular parcel is undeveloped, as you can tell. There is massive development in the area. This is a PUD that was shown on the previous slide. That's for the seniors facility that's been there a long time. The property to the south is within a CUP. It's zoned single-family or SF5, but it's developed also by the CUP with multifamily development. So you've got multifamily to the south, and then obviously multifamily to the west. This is now CVS on this corner. I believe this is the car wash, and then we've got other commercial development here at Mays Road and Mays Court. This is the location. It's identified as a new employment within the comprehensive plan. This is the property in question. It is the odd shape which comes out with a neck that comes out all the way to Mays Road. As you can tell, kind of from the aerial, there's an internal drive, and if you've been out there, you can come in off of Mays Court, and then this internal drive will let you go all the way out again to 13th Street. So there isn't already existing internal circulation. That road does avoid CVS, although they have an access drive onto 13th Street. This is their drive-up window for their pharmacy. And I've got an aerial that I think that will show, or a photo that will show that. The intention is that this property, which is parcel 2 and proposed to become 2A and 2B, would be split. We've not seen an application to split the lot yet. I think they're waiting on this amendment if it goes through. But 2B would become used for a multi-story indoor storage facility, and the applicant is here with information regarding that particular design. The balance of the property would remain by the restriction for potential commercial uses under the existing language within the CUP. It was originally intended, I think, more was kind of a potentially another type of a big box retail type of facility. But given what all is happening within the marketplace, that has not materialized, and now we're being proposed with this type of development. That's the outline of the parcel that we're talking about having the amendment apply to, that would create parcel 2A and 2B. This is kind of looking at the site. We're kind of looking to the northwest. If you've been out there, there's some mounds of dirt here along the south end of the property, but for the most part, it is all open. That's the site looking, at this point, we're in that internal drive looking across the open field, and this is the seniors complex that sits to the west. Here you see the end of the CVS, and this is their drive-up window I talked about. This is that internal drive that meanders out, turns back here, and then comes out to 13th Street. Once you get back out in this area, 13th Street is behind that pickup. This is a site, I'm kind of at the far west end of Mays Court, right where it bleeds into the entryway into the multifamily development that's within the CUP to the south. This is the seniors complex, and this is across kind of, again, that open area. Here you see one of those mounds of dirt that are existing on the site. At this point, I'm kind of up at the north end, looking back south across the site. This would be roughly where the new development is proposed to go. Here we're looking west along 13th Street from the entryway off of CVS's parking lot, and then this is looking back east along 13th Street to give you an idea of what kind of was happening. They were working on 13th Street when I took the picture some time ago, so. No, Wichita does not have orange cones everywhere, but they were here that day. So, staff is recommending approval of this change. Let me find where. There's your link. The agents, the applicants are here, and we can address kind of, and they showed this at the DAB meeting Monday night, and they had some information regarding the content of what this is about. We're supporting the amendment to the CUP They are asking for some modifications of certain standards, but I think you have a lot better feel of exactly what's going on after you see the substance of what the agents and applicants are talking about building here. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this point.
Mr. Richardson?
And what was the action of the DAB?
Unanimous. They recommended approval, particularly after they saw the presentation by the applicants, which you're about to see.
What didn't seem to be worked out is the waivers with regards to the signage. It was not clear in the report
There
how
is
that's
not,
going to be.
yeah, they've not addressed signage, and that's one of the things that we would have to subsequently address once we got into some specifics of what they're proposing to do. There are limitations under the code and under the existing CUP, and I presume they're aware of that. But I think they've got a better feel of, and can probably answer your questions better about the extent of signage, if any, that they're going to talk about.
But they're asking for a waiver of 13, which has to do with signs. And is that something can be worked out at staff without having action here? I mean, I'm
Well, I think,
concerned about.
no, we need to, if you've got information, if they provide information with more specificity today, we can handle that. If not, it's probably going to be a subsequent adjustment.
No, if you waive 13, then the CUP signage applies.
Yes.
And are we comfortable with the CUP signage, or is that what we're suggesting gets changed or not? No?
There was no proposed change to the signage provisions in the CUP from the applicant.
Okay.
They just didn't want to comply with the more restrictive signage requirements of the.
And we're okay with that as staff? Is that, yeah, okay. That clarifies that. Thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Okay, seeing none, we'll have agent or applicant please come forward. If you'll state your name and address, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Brody Glenn with Centennial American Properties. My address is 935 South Main Street, Greenville, South Carolina. First off, I'd like to say thank you all for your time. I was chairman of our city's planning commission for a long time. Understand that sometimes it can be thankless, but it's something that is needed, and I appreciate y'all allowing us to come up in front of y'all. What we have is a product, a prototype that's not in Wichita. It is a multi-story climate control self-storage facility. The floor plate is 33,000 square feet or a little bigger, and it's 3 stories tall. As we developed this prototype, one of the things that we knew that cities and jurisdictions wouldn't like is the idea of gates. In today's world, people don't like gates, and so one of the things we worked through was finding a way. There we go. Finding a way to be able to pull the cars actually through the building. And so on each side, as you see here, there's a glass garage door that will open. There's a 30-foot vehicular drive through the building. Inside that drive will be 2 elevators that people can load and unload. For the most part, the building will look and feel like a retail establishment. There is no external doors. There is no external, well, there's man doors, but there's no external loading directly into a unit. The sales area will be here on the corner, and it'll be about 800 square feet, which we will operate. And then besides that, it will be all storage. The building itself is about 105,000 square feet gross, 75,000 square feet rentable. We are working on 3 of these here in Wichita. We're excited about being in Wichita. I think we'll see y'all again next month or in 2 weeks on a different project. And we're doing these from coast to coast. We're partnered with a big financial institution out of New York. So I'll show y'all a couple of different elevations. Be more than welcome to answer any questions. But first off, this is the kind of a normal proto that we're doing here in Wichita. And this is another proto that we're doing here in Wichita. We think the gray is more appropriate for a project we're working on Webb. More than likely, we'll do the brown here in Mays just because we feel like it fits in better. But certainly we can look at either one of them. From a site plan standpoint, The pictures that you saw, where that big pile of dirt was, it looks like it was a big borrow area that somebody just dumped right here, which will be our detention pond. On this side, currently there's a fence and there's mature trees that are there that will not affect. In the back, we'll have no access at all. So the back of the store will serve as a fence. Certainly we'll landscape and do what we need to do here. And then our drive through the building will come from this side of the building towards the south and then out. And that drive's one way. And the drive set up 30 feet is to have the ability for 2 cars or a car to park on each side and somebody to be able to pull through. I'm happy to go into more detail or answer any questions that y'all may have.
Richardson.
This doesn't have anything to do with this approval. I'm curious as to what kind of uses you see here. Is it simply storage? Do people?
Self-storage.
And it's, some of these self-storage units, people try to run a business out of. That doesn't seem like that's going to work here very well.
No, that's what, actually. In y'all's code, it says that we have to have a residential manager that lives on site. That's what we're going away from, is that, and what we're doing is providing, as towns become more dense, more people need to store things. And so what we're doing, instead of having storage that's out in an industrial area, we're bringing it to the retail hub, so it's more convenient for the consumer. Our background is retail development. We're one of Walgreens' largest developers in the country, Trader Joe's. And it's the same theory. We don't want to pick up trips. We want people already driving by.
But what's the average size of a unit that people would rent in here?
100 square feet.
100 square feet.
So total leasables, 75,000, and we'll have about 750 units. But they'll range from 5x5s to 10 by 30s. And some of the things we're doing is, today people aren't used to bending down and rolling up a big door. So on the smaller units, we're going to have regular doors that feel more like a closet. It will operate. It'll have somebody there from 8:30 to 5:30. Extra Space Storage, who's the second largest storage company in the country, will operate it, and it will be branded Extra Space. And then you'll be able to come to the facility between 7 and 10, I believe, or 6 and 10.
Thank you.
Mr. Hartman.
On your site plan, you mentioned a drive-through that goes from the north to the south.
Mm-hmm.
And then will your access then be off of Mays Road?
It doesn't show very well. I was actually looking at that when we were showing the plans. That our access will tie into that little access road that goes over to Mays. And so there's an operating agreement between the whole development. So we'll access kind of here is where that road kind of squiggles through. And so we have access here off of
That's Mays.
Mays, and then here off 13th. So basically, we're going to operate the same as there. And I'll tell you, as far as being a neighbor, like I said, we've done a lot of retail. Retail can be hard for neighbors. There's noise. There's things we can't control, from distribution, trucks, trash, all those things. This use, although it's a little taller, is a very quiet use. And, we'd like for it to be used more than it is, but it's just not used on a daily basis by all the people. And so it really is a nice, quiet neighbor. It's a great transition from commercial into multifamily. So I do think it's something that will fit in.
How about your signage? Do you have anything in mind for the
The
signage?
reason my background's retail, and so we believe in signage, also believe in signage done correctly. And so what I'd like is it will be branded Extra Space. I'm happy to come back here. I've never killed a deal because of signage, but I'd love to be able to work with staff to get the appropriate signage that fits the building and fits what's there.
Thinking you'll have a sign out on Mays or on 13th?
So building sign or monument sign?
Type sign?
Yeah, so we'll have we will have a sign, a monument sign on 13th. And then we'll have traditional building signage. But like I said, in today's world, I think everybody's got a telephone and everybody's got Google Maps or something similar. It's pretty easy to find things. But we still need people to be able to recognize it.
Foster?
Two questions. You mentioned the on-site manager being there from a certain time. Does there need to be a modification in the zoning provisions that they're not going to be on site permanently?
Right, y'all's code, which we're asking for variance from, says that a residential manager shall be required to own the site and shall be responsible for maintaining the operation of the facilities in conformance with the conditions of approval. Residential manager is what we're not going to have a residential manager.
We would need to have a modification for that in our motion, correct?
Right, and I think that's part of.
That's in their proposal.
Yep.
Were you to take staff recommendation, that would be included.
And this goes back to this, what we're doing is a little different from the guys that presented it in front of us, but it's definitely different from the mini storage that we saw 20 years ago where you had somebody living on site and that kind of thing.
At this time, can you give us the modifications on the signage that ought to be considered, or is that covered as well in the staff?
They're just asking for a waiver of supplemental use regulation number 13, which limits the signage to 50 square feet and 20 feet in height. Removing that, then the signage would just be per the CUP, which is basically LC signage with a few tweaks to it. I'd tell you what they were, but I can't read what's
On that sign, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson?
Just one comment. So I won't do this, but I could say to my wife, we're in the process of trying to eliminate things at our household. And so, if she found this, like, okay, I can put my stuff in the car in the garage. I can drive over here in the rain and never get wet and keep my stuff stored, right?
Exactly right. Climate controlled, and so therefore nothing will come back. And that's what you just said is the customer we're going after, is somebody that does not. Today, only 9% of households in the U.S. have storage, so there's a lot of runway. But we're going after the people who do have storage currently, but also the people who have never thought about having storage.
Well, I'm not going to tell her, so don't advertise, okay?
Send me your address, I'll make sure he sends you a direct marketing deal. But no, that's what you just explained is exactly, we're trying to change the psychology of self-storage. And they've done these stores in top 15 markets, and they've done really, really well. And what we're doing is coming into secondary markets with power we want to control the market. That's why we're doing 3 stores.
Richardson, you can just tell her to get rid of that stuff.
That's easier said than done with my
Been there,
wife.
done that.
Mr. Warren?
Not working
I've got
well.
3 storage units.
I'm looking at a lot of parking stalls. Is that just because you need it for code, or is that something that you actually use with what's your experience been with?
We don't need a lot of parking. Most of our parking, so we actually consider, it depends on how the code looks at it, but we consider the pull-through is really the parking for the customer. All we need parking for is the employees and, 3 or 4, maybe 5 other cars. I'm happy to get rid of as much parking as you want us to. I think it's probably there because of code.
Okay. And the other question, what is the square foot, the footprint? What's the square foot?
This about 34,500 plus or minus.
34,000 square foot for
Yeah.
the footprint? Not for the building, for the entire site.
I don't have our site plan in front of me that has it. This is the CUP site plan. Doug, do you have that site plan? And we've got handouts too. We're more than happy to hand out.
102,000 square feet.
Well, guess.
But it's
I better not guess.
Yeah, I don't need an exact number, just a ballpark figure.
It's about 2 acres.
About 2 acres.
2.5 acres. Yeah, it's 2.5. We got that above ground detention.
Okay, that's what I need. Thank you.
Yeah. Doug printed them if anybody wants.
Mr. Foster?
Recycle.
I'd appreciate guidance from staff on this, and that is, it looks to me like there's more than double the parking needed on the site plan we're looking at, I'm wondering if we can modify and reduce whatever code's calling for on this, based upon the description of the use here.
I would say that, yeah, you just verbally tell us that we're accepting the general idea of the footprint of the building on here, but all the other details will be dealt with at building permit stage, and we'll can deal with approval. This is not a binding site plan to that extent.
So Doug is actually going to pass, I think it will be beneficial for everybody to see a detailed site plan. We're showing 30 parking spaces. That's way more than we need. From a paving standpoint, impervious standpoint, all those things, we're more than happy to get rid of that row of 17 there, if that's something the commission wants us to do.
If your motion goes with, and I'll let Dale or Scott tweak my comment here, but if the motion is to take the recommendation of staff, we're not creating a binding site plan here. We're identifying modifications to the CUP for use. And then as site plans accompany the building permits, we'll deal with code requirements at that point.
Can I ask a question? Would we have to come back if we are below code in our parking? Would we have to come back to planning commission then?
No.
No?
We
Okay.
have the ability to handle administrative adjustments.
Great.
Okay,
Well, I have a question to staff. It's a question of why there's so many parking. Was that a requirement of staff based on code, or what was it?
No, I just looked at it. The parking requirement actually is the 13 spaces on the west side. 17 spaces are not required by code. They submitted it that way. The one thing that is shown on the site plan that was just turned in that I think this commission does need to address, on the west side, there is in the current CUP a 35-foot setback. This building that's shown on this does not respect that setback. We pointed that out and indicated that the application did not request a reduction of the setback, and so if that's something the applicant is looking for, we need to address that.
Yeah, we'll get rid of those parking spaces. We'll get rid of those 17 parking spaces, move the building up 20 feet.
Yeah, there you go. That'd be my suggestion. Yeah, okay.
Solves two problems at one time.
So what you're saying, Scott, is for them to use the building be on the property line, it has to be an exception to that?
Actually, the comment that was just made is that they'll just do get rid of the 17 parking spaces on the east side, which would be, would allow them then to add that 20 feet for the setback on the west side. So they'll just shift everything to the east.
There's a 20-foot something that's more than the landscape buffer that our consultants missed, and so we'll just slide the building forward, which is better for us anyway.
all right, any other questions from the commission? If not, is there anybody from the audience who would like to speak on this case? All right, seeing none, we will bring it back to the commission for action.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I move for approval, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Mr. McKay.
We need to have an emotion exemption of the parking requirements as shown on the, modified by
Fine
the
with that.
discussion on parking.
Are you both willing to accept that
Yes, I'm
amendment to the
fine with
motion?
that.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries 13-0. Thank you.
Me too, but I don't know if any did that until I get,
All right, with that, do I
Until I
adjourn?
get this. 'Cause I go out and look at this.
I'm going to adjourn the MAPC meeting and we will move in, or the MAPC will move into the BZA.
Yeah.
And we will start with agenda item number 1, which is approval of the BZA minutes from December 6, 2018.
We approve.
So Green moves to approve, and the second was by Mr. Richardson? Okay, and Mr. Terrell, looks like it, Mr. Florence, Mr. Terrell Florence will be abstaining. All in
Sir.
favor, pardon me?
Sir.
Sir, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. 12:01. All right, agenda item number 2, BZA 2018-00069.
Good afternoon, Matt Williams, Associate Planner. This case is a request for a variance to reduce the interior side setback from 6 feet to 0 feet for a carport structure located at 3140 South Bennett. Up here on the screen, you can see the property right here. The applicant discovered that the carport that they had installed was in violation of the setback requirement, and they are now requesting this variance. Staff has received some comments from the next door property owner, and you should have these handouts at your spot. The applicant stated that the owner has a unique health condition that requires their car to be covered and out of the elements while also being as close to their property as possible. The carport is currently located right next to their side door. There's no location on the property where a carport or an additional garage could be located that would also meet this need. Additionally, the applicant was relying on a contractor that failed to obtain the necessary permits, putting the applicant in this unfortunate situation. You'll see in your packet, we also obtained a doctor's note describing the building as medically necessary. In addition, removing the existing carport would put a financial hardship and a great inconvenience on the applicant. The recommendation of staff is that the variance to reduce the side setback should be granted, subject to the conditions in your staff report. Here are some photos I took of the carport. Here's a structure right here. Head on. And then you can see some of the other properties around here. This is looking west, looking southeast from the site, and looking northeast from the site. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the commission? Mr. Warren?
I only see one photo that gives me an inclination, but I'm a little bit concerned about drainage. There's a guttering on that, on the end of that, and then it drains out. Looks like that there's a downspout that actually does put the water back on the applicant's own driveway. Does that drain all the way from the back to the front, or is there another downspout at the back end, and what happens with that water? Do you have any idea?
I didn't go on the property, I just was on the outside, so I noticed it's draining to the front of the property, but I'll let the applicant speak on that.
Other questions from the commission? Okay, seeing none, if agent or applicant could please come forward, state your name and address, and you have 10 minutes to present.
Good afternoon. My name is Adib Michael. I represent Romani Construction, the company that built the carport for Mr. and Mrs. Oak back in February 2nd, 2018. We involved in the contract with good faith. They stated that the health condition that's required for this structure to be built, I failed to obtain the required building permit, which I will provide as a requirement at the end of your statement here. As you know, stated and as it's written here, it's a health requirement for them, so it's not, you know, a luxury addition or something that they just need. And apparently it meets all the 5 conditions, and I should be able to get all the permits. As you know, I'm a licensed general contractor, so I will be able to get all the permits needed. I've done several projects for Mr. and Mrs. Oak in the past, and you know, some of them required permits. We got the permits and approved. There was no problems, but you know, I appreciate your time and your listening and your consideration to this. And we will get, one question was about the drainage. It does drain from the back to the front, so there is no other downspout because the way their lot is sloped, it's sloped to the outside. So it has to come in one downspout, which, collects all the water and drains to the front and away from the house. Pictures? No, it's right here in the picture. So. Any questions?
Questions from the commission? Okay.
How long have you been a contractor?
About, license, I got the general contractor as a Class A since about 2 years.
Or you were aware that this did require a permit?
This is actually a very good question. This was the first one that we do on the side of a house, which, again, my mistake, my apologies, and I'm ready to correct it, with any penalties or anything that you would see proper for this. But we normally, like the one that we did in the past, was in the front of the houses, which I know it does require permits, and we got the permits and inspection. I'm in very good relationship with, the city and the inspectors, I know most of them by name, and we have not had any violation or any similar situation in the past.
Other questions from the commission? If not, thank you. Sir. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Well, if you'll step forward and state your name and address. And you'll have 3 minutes.
You can click these arrows to change the photos if you want.
How about that photo?
This one?
The one that showed there, right there. Thank you for listening to me today. I brought a written statement, and I'll read it as fast as I can.
Sir, could you state your name and address, please?
My name is Merle McCullough. I live at 3134 Bennett Avenue. I'm the house just north of this structure. Little background, up until October 16, 2018, the McCulloughs and the Oaks were friends. We had each other's house keys in case of emergencies. Sometime during 2018, Karen Oaks said she was going to have a carport built. She was tired of having to carry groceries in while it was raining. I, Merle McCullough, took it as a passing thought, as some of the suggested thoughts never came to pass. My mistake. This one did. In seeing the way the structure was built, I told Karen that rainwater was going to land on my property and could affect the house foundation. She said they would put up eave troughs. I thought at that time that was going to be the extent of the building. Karen did not indicate at the time that there was going to be further construction. I was wrong again. With a short period of time, the same construction company was putting up more of the existing structure, extending it into the at the end of the house porch. That totally damaged the curb appeal of my house. Not only that, the way the roof was constructed, it was going to dump more rainwater on my yard. I again complained to the Oaks, and they put up eave troughs that didn't help. They wouldn't or couldn't the roofing was so badly put on that the rain just shot over the eaves troughs into my property. Several times I tried to get the Oaks to call the contractor back and make him fix it, but they wouldn't or couldn't. The thing that broke my patience was when Mr. Oaks called me and wanted to know how cold of weather I would work in. In asking why he asked, he said he was thinking of going to Lowe's and getting corrugated roofing and fixing the problem himself. Again, I told him to get the contractor to fix the roof, that I would not help him. There were other problems with the roof structurally. All during the time I was trying to get them to fix the roof, the Oaks were constantly complaining about the $10,000 that the contractor charged them for the job. They did not have any one good thing to say about him. They said that the last part of the construction wasn't supposed to be done until early next spring, which would be 2019. I asked Mrs. Oakes why she didn't stop them. She said that being the construction company had already started on the second part, they let him finish. To bring the problem to it, I'm going to be needing a couple more minutes, please.
We can give you that.
Thank you. I was going to contact the contractor and force him to fix the various problems with the roof. I also told the Oaks that I was going to call the city inspection office and get the name of the city inspector who signed off on the job. It was at that time that Mrs. Oaks stated there was a city inspector sitting in a car parked in the street on the last day of construction. On contacting the city, I was informed that no inspection had been made because no permit had been secured to build the structure. I was told the city would be out to look into the problem. On October 16, 2018, I get a call from the beauty shop on South Seneca that my wife had fallen in the parking lot and was severely injured. I took my pickup and went over to the scene and found my wife, a bloody face, broken glasses, and a broken right arm. An ambulance took her to the hospital, and I went to home to pick up some things for a hospital stay. Arriving home, I asked Mrs. Oakes if she would help me retrieve my other vehicle that was still at the beauty shop. She did, and I went on to the hospital. After several hours, I returned home. I was greeted by Mrs. Oakes dangling a set of keys in my face. She said the keys were for my house and that she wanted her house keys back. I asked if she was divorcing me, and she said yes. She was angry. Unbeknownst to me, the city inspectors came out to inspect the structure problem while I was at the hospital and told the Oaks something that they did not want to hear. Mrs. Oakes accused me of costing them $10,000, not caring if their vehicles were protected or not, and anything else that came to mind, screaming at the top of her lungs. Mr. Oakes was standing in his driveway saying, "Don't you ever look at me again, McCullough. Don't you ever look at me again." Not getting a word in edgewise, I went into my house, and I haven't spoken to them since. I did send them a note through the mail suggesting they were accusing the wrong guy of what happened, and they needed to rethink what they were doing. The only thing I did wrong was trusting that either they or the contractor had done things legally and got a permit to build that monster. I'm 83 years old and most likely be selling my home sooner than later. That structure totally damaged the curb appeal of the house.
Mr. McCullough, your time is up, sir.
I'm okay. That's fine.
And just to reassure you, we have this information, and I think most of the commission has had an opportunity to read your statement that you've provided for us. So we do have the other things that you wanted to talk about on this, the handout we've read.
Do what, ma'am?
I printed out the paper for them, so they've read it.
Yeah, I didn't know what she said at the end.
Yes, the commission was distributed your statement, and we've all read the statement. So anything that you didn't get read while you were standing at the podium, we've read.
Oh, okay.
Just to reassure you. Is there any questions? Hold just a second. Is there any questions from the commission?
I do. I have one.
Okay, Mr. Florence.
Okay, what type of damage has occurred on your property?
Well, the rain comes over that roof so fast, and the way the roof was set on there, it just shoots over the eaves troughs. And now I have Bermuda grass, and it needs sun. No amount of sun lands on that property right there between the house and the carport. It has killed the Bermuda grass, and now it's turning into a mud hole. And the way that roof is built, there's no way to fix it. In fact, the eave troughs are on my property. So the solution to what was happening there actually has to be on my property to even drain any of that water off there. But most of the water goes past that eave trough, right onto the property. And there's only 6 foot between the house and that the drain lines. So that water comes down, it goes in 2 different places. Now, toward the end here, toward the end of the carport, the ground does slope toward the street a little bit, but not back there. And so it's causing a problem, and it'll always cause a problem, no matter what they do with it, especially the roof. Let's see, I'll show you. Sorry.
Which photo do you want?
Well, I want to show them. that, see how the roof is, the line, roof line?
Here.
And here's another spot, and then I need the other one too. I want the curb appeal. Where's the curb appeal? Yeah. There. And there's the curb appeal.
But it is encroaching upon your property.
Pardon?
It is encroaching upon your
Yes.
property.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Foster?
Mr. McCullough, what solutions do you see that the neighbor could do that would make this acceptable to you? For example, if they were required to put on an oversized guttering, if they were required to put on drainage system on your property or rock or something, what solutions would help you?
I don't know, it's just such a small area. I don't know that anything would. Did you notice how the roofing is? I mean, the construction itself. The thing where I was stuck was the fact that we had been friends a long time, and I didn't want to cause any problems, and I did try to get them to fix it, and they wouldn't. And I just got frustrated. And I said, I'm going to find out how this even came about. And come to find out they never had, I was never showed anything what they were going to do. It just happened.
Other questions from the commission?
Got a question. You mentioned
Mr.
that there
Hartman.
was, it was built in two phases possibly?
Yeah, it showed up one day and there it was, half of it was, and it was right about where the house door is. And I talked to her about it. At that time, I brought up the fact that he was draining water onto my property. And then the next thing I know, they're putting up the rest of it. There was a pause. And we find out that half of it wasn't supposed to be built until this spring. And so it was a surprise to them too, because they find out that the guys started the second part. I mean, I didn't
Like
understand.
built in a front half and a back half, or how?
They built the back half first.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Foster?
Mr. McCullough, would it aid you if they were to be required to install a concrete channel on your property to direct the water towards the street? Would that assist you or help you?
The whole thing just takes away from my property, the site of it. We have put tons of money into that house. It's like new. I don't know what would make it look better than that.
Other questions from the commission?
I got it.
Mr. Richardson?
Well, I've got a question of other commissioners. We have some builders here, and I'm wondering, is there a way to modify this so that if you look at the edge of this, obviously the roofing's not even laying flat. Is there a way to fix this guttering so you can catch all that water? Modify that? I don't know.
I can't hear you.
He's asking a question of the commissioners.
Pardon?
He's asking a question of the commissioners.
Not knowing how it's totally constructed, but the only way you're really gonna contain it with a gutter is like an internal gutter, so it dams the water up on the existing roof, which I personally think if somebody would go in there and check the elevation and pour concrete from this gentleman's foundation back to their other property, so if it did go overflow, it shows the water back on the approach and sends it out the driveway. That way it don't get any water in his foundation. And I mean, I can understand there's a squabble between owners, but I don't know how we can deal with that in here. And as far as me saying whether the workmanship's good or not, I'm not gonna say.
Right, yeah, that's not our job to
No.
to get involved in the squabble. Other questions from the commission?
One thing about what Mr. Johnson just got through saying is if you look at one of these pictures, it shows they have shrubs all along the south side of their property. So I don't know how you, without tearing those out, are going to do anything to alleviate the problem that we got. It looks like to me it's a corrugated roof. Is that right? It looks, I mean, this one picture on this page, the first page, if you look at it, it looks like it's a corrugated roof of some sort, which would direct the water that way to begin with.
Point of order. Before we look at solutions, let's see if there's anybody else that wants to speak on this issue from the audience.
Sure. Raise your hand.
Ma'am, would you like to speak? Okay, can you come up to the front and state your name and address, please? And you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Dora McCullough, and I live at 3134 Bennett. And first off, I went to know when the rule about anything couldn't be built beyond the front of the houses on that block. When I inquired 20 years ago, we wanted to build on, and enclosing the front porch was an option, but they said no. Cannot be done. Now this carport thing is sticking way out in my yard. It's not only beyond the front of their house, it's beyond the front of their porch. Also, she has to walk from the house to the car, to get to the garage, to get the car. Why not put the walkway out behind the house and come into the garage from the side? That would not affect our property at all. Any other questions?
Any questions from the commission? Seeing none, thank you, ma'am. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case?
I didn't hear what you said.
I was just asking if there was anybody else from the audience that wanted to speak on this case.
Probably not. Our neighborhood has went rental, and they have been taking care of their houses, and we have no problem with them. So, but they're all temporary, so we don't have any backup.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, now if we can, Mr. Florence, did you have a question?
I wanted to ask Jeff them about the encroachment upon property from property owners when somebody encroaches upon somebody's property.
Correct. They would have a civil action to try to have that removed.
Okay. If we could get agent or applicant back up for a 2-minute rebuttal.
First, I would like to apologize for Mr. Merrill, about any inconvenience that this building caused to his property. And, everyone was asking or trying to get this corrected as to keep it for Mrs. Oak's medical needs. In my opinion, I would think a wider gutters can be installed and, eliminate the water problem. We can test it and we can, just verify that this is effective, to help his cause and, to solve the problem. And, again, if there's anything needed to be done, it will be done. And if anyone have any questions for me, please do.
Questions from the commission. Mr. Foster.
Sir, is the front portion of this carport necessary for the owner to get to their vehicle in a covered setting? Is that front portion necessary?
It does, yes, it does. And the reason why this is actually, I was about to tell you on this section of why it was built in 2 stages. It was just financial, and it was not, 10,000 by any mean. And Mr. and Mrs. Oak has a copy of the contract here if anyone wants to look at it. They built the first half first, and then they said, just for, our financing, we won't be able to do the other half until, a certain amount of time or, after a while. So, no, we said yes, we built the one, and of course, if you can see, there is, two 6x6 posts, tied together, which kind of like separates the first half and then the second half. But to answer your question, yes, because actually the second half is what covers pretty much the back of the vehicle. So if she parked any further, it will not be covered. For her to step down from the vehicle and get inside the house, as to the least steps required, or the least action because of her health condition, then I would say, yes, it is required.
So are you saying that it couldn't potentially be shortened up a couple of feet?
Like from the street, it can be, but the question was for the whole half of the building, but it can be shortened up a little bit. We'll have to measure it out, but it is possible because it does get all the way up to the front of the house.
What about from side to side?
From side, like the width of it, it is possible, but it's gonna defeat the whole purpose of it because, both Mr. and Mrs. Oaks does have, bigger vehicles. Mr. Oak have a full-size pickup truck and Mrs. Oak have an SUV. So for them to drive in comfortably and open the door without any risk of, getting into like an ice or any weather elements, then it will like extremely negatively affecting the whole purpose of the project.
Mr. Bill Johnson.
The carport is on the south side of the residence? Is that correct?
North side. The north side of the subject property.
It's in the north side. No, it's the north side.
I guess what I'm curious about, is there a gutter on the house that's just above the canopy?
There is a gutters on the house, and the way we built it, that we started the roof from the bottom of the gutters, so it will not have any loads of the water coming from the roof of the house, and it's only collecting the water that comes on the roof of the house. Is this your question?
How does the water come off of that roof? Where's the downspout for it?
Did
it drain onto the carport?
Okay, this is.
No, I'm talking about around the side there.
Other side.
Here, like this one?
Cable in at that point.
Does it drain here from the roof of the house?
Downspout takes.
Yes, this here is one of the drainage from just the house guttering system.
Okay.
This one.
What's above the carport on that side?
This one.
No?
Next
Back
to the
of
house, at the eve of the house.
This one here?
No.
The existing roof line that goes back.
Or gutter along there.
Here on this
No,
one,
no,
or
no,
going
no,
going
that side,
going
that side
across
there.
on top of
Yeah.
the carport.
Yeah.
There should be one probably at the same location as this one, because this gutter is like going all the way around the house because the way the roof is structured. Yes, so around the same spot here on the back of the house, there should be another downspout. And the building itself is properly built, and I have not heard any issues. Anytime anyone called me, I respond immediately. So if there's any corrections again or anything that needs to be done to resolve this problem peacefully, I'm willing and able to do it. Again, if the whole point of doing just the gutters is for Mr. and Mrs. Oaks, when they called me, they said, we want to make sure that the water is not going to be dropping from this roof on their neighbors. So they added this gutters later after we built the structure. Again, as Mr. Merrill stated that, we built it right on the property line. So the gutters is probably on his property, which also it's going to require, quite a bit of work, of course, to move it an inch or 2 inches. That's kind of like on his property. And then at this point, we can also put a wider gutters, like wide commercial gutters that will definitely eliminate the problem of, water shooting. And this only happens, as to my knowledge, only one time when it rained, like extreme rain that we've never experienced before for like 2-3 days non-stop was September or October between. Oh. Okay, so this is basically the only times that I've heard that there's a problem, and of course we acted immediately as soon as this thing happened. And again, I really appreciate your listening and trying to make this work out, and I'm with you on any decision or anything that needs to be done.
Okay, we have several different questions, and
Yeah.
I'm going to go around the table, but can you give me the width of that structure?
The width from the house out, I think it's 12 foot.
12 foot. Okay, thank you. Mr. Richardson.
Was there ever any consideration given to building this so that you could have access to the back door and not the front door?
Like
Looks
do
to me
the
like
building on the back?
Yeah.
We
looks to
talked
me
about
like that
this.
would have
It's
been the place to do it. I'm
it's
looking
not
at-
it's not possible for their vehicles to turn around in this, and it's going to require
Well, it wouldn't be a turnaround, just be a carport. Move
carport.
it to the back of the house in front of the garage, so you get in the back door instead of the front door.
We discussed this option before we start doing this as an option of just moving it, and we found out that on the back there is more steps going up the house to get from the backyard, and of course definitely it's going to be more walking distance to Mrs. Oak to get in from this point to the back door.
Well, in the back, you could have room to install a ramp or whatever you need to get up into the house. It would look to me like that would be an option here.
All right, Mr. McKay.
Well, I don't feel it's this
Yes.
body's position to redesign the carport. Quite frankly, right now, it is whether or not we approve the fact that they're encroaching. The gentleman didn't get a building permit. I don't know where they're at on that. It sounded like to me two neighbors are arguing with each other because of the deal. I think the suggestion that Mr. Johnson and also Mr. Foster had, putting a 12-inch or whatever it is deal between the two properties. You can't run it all the way from the house because there's shrubs and everything else. And one of the complaints is you're ruining the value of the property in my property. But redesigning and whether they go in the back door, front door, upside down is not our responsibility as of this Board of Zoning Appeals. It's either approve the application or turn it down.
Mr. Let me get Mr. Bill Johnson quick, and I'll
Okay.
come back to you, Mr. Daly.
This is a staff question.
Okay.
Do we know what the status is with the city on permitting or anything like this on this?
As far as whether they've gotten permits or not?
Well, apparently they haven't, but I don't know what stage it's in, because I guess my thought is, if we approve it and then turn around and it's inspected and said they're not gonna get a permit on it, chances are they'll tear it down, or I don't know. I'm just,
As far as I know, they haven't attempted to get permits for it yet, but approval would require them to get permits, so you're right with your statement.
Daly.
You talked about that you had solutions. Can you do those without getting on the McCullough land?
Yes, definitely. The only thing that's kind of like encroaching his property right now is the gutters, because as we stated, we built it on the property line. So when we added the gutters is the only thing that's sticking out. So we can move it back.
So you personally, as you construct it,
Yes.
can you stay off of his land while you're doing the construction?
Staying out of, like not stepping on his land. Is that the
Correct.
question?
If he doesn't want you on his land, it seems like since you're feuding, there's a feud there that they may not want you on the land to redo what you need to redo. So
I don't think that's really for us to decide here. Mr. Green.
I move that we grant the variance.
For a second. Okay, motion dies for lack of a second. Mr. Dool, did you have a question?
Well, my question was, the request here is to grant the variance, right?
So if they would have gone in for a permit in the first place, they would have had to have gotten the variance before somebody would have issued the permit. And it's all conjecture at this point. So I would say I move not to grant the variance.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second not to grant the variance. Discussion, Mr. Foster.
This is a staff question. Now, let's say that they do decide to go and get with MABCD. Can they work with MABCD on modifications that would perhaps make this acceptable, and they can bring it back again for a variance?
That's possible. I mean, they could file another application.
Gotta make it right.
We'd have to continue this one because they couldn't bring back the same application, can they?
Well, that's for zoning as opposed to variances, I believe.
Mr.
Well,
Bill
let me
Johnson.
check that, double check and see if there's
Can
time
it
on
be
it.
can we table it till?
That would be another option, is to table any action and direct that they try to get a building permit and identify what issues have come up there and then come back and handle it in a subsequent meeting.
I guess I'd be in favor of tabling it and know that the owners of the cover, as well as their contractor, works to solve the problems code-wise, but also work on something to get where the water don't come on the neighbor's property where they're in agreement when it comes back.
Mr. Johnson, is that a motion?
Yes.
I'd second
I
that.
withdraw my motion.
Okay, so we now have a motion by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Klossmeyer to,
You gotta
Haley
withdraw the
was
second.
Who had the second?
who had the second?
Do you withdraw your second?
Well, yeah, since the motion's not there, I can't second that one.
Okay. Discussion, Mr. Foster.
I'm
You all are
going-
keeping me on my toes.
I'm going back to Mr. Richardson's comment. I mean, there's so many things that are just not right here relative to the requirements. For example, getting it off of the frontage here, dealing with the drainage. So I'm going to support the motion.
Okay, Mr. Joe Johnson.
You expect to talk to each other on this? I say, who do we expect to talk to each other on this?
The applicant would need to get with MABCD and find out what it would take for him to get a building permit and any other violations, and make sure that his application is addressing those violations.
We're asking them to be the mediator?
Well, they're the ones that didn't get the permit. They need to go get it. It shouldn't be,
No, I mean, we're
Yeah.
asking MABCD to be the mediator?
well, no, it'd just be a standard. They would go try and get a building permit and then MABCD in a normal course of action would identify the things that prevent them from giving them a permit, if there are any. Obviously, the setback is one of them.
Yes, back here.
Can I get a clarification on what the motion is?
The motion is to defer.
Defer to definitely no requirement to bring it back at any time?
Well,
Not knowing what's gonna be required, I don't know if you could.
I think you would have to, you'd have to put a time limit on it, 30
60
days
days?
or 60 days, whatever.
60 days.
Much. You can do that in 30 days.
Okay with a second,
Yes. I've got a question for staff.
Bailey?
So if MAPCD doesn't give them what they want, then what happens?
Yes, that's a good point.
Well, I mean, obviously, they're going to end up back here because of the encroachment on the setback. But, and staff is going to talk to MABCD about what they're seeing, but this way it puts the onus on them to get with MABCD, figure out what all they need in order to be able to get a building permit, and then be back here to explain that to you, and then you can do whatever you need to do.
If they don't approve it though, and they say tear it down, then is that what they have to do? not to us.
Well, they're not going to issue a demolition until this application is addressed one way or the other. Their policy is to not proceed with enforcement action if there is an application that can fix it.
Mr. Klossmeyer.
I think that we all know that the problem here is not the variance. It's the way it was done and the encroachment and everything else. If this would have came in clean, there would have been absolutely a slam dunk. So it was coming in and asking for forgiveness instead of permission, basically. So we've got a problem here, and we're trying to protect the neighbor out there because we can't adversely affect his property. He's got a lot of landscaping and in his home as much as the Oaks do. But that what they have done has encroached upon their livelihood over there. And I think that's the fly in the ointment here. So I think the best solution is what the motion is, and let them defer, let them work it out and get it to where it's acceptable.
Any other discussion? Mr. Warren.
I got a question, and I'm going to rely on Mr. Bill Johnson. How big of a gutter it could, my take is that if we can eliminate or reduce the drainage problem, that we go a long way towards making this thing a compromise that can work for a lot of folks. What kind of guttering, I mean, you guys use bigger guttering in your business. What kind of guttering could have?
Easy solution would to move the gutter clear back behind the eave, shorten up the eave, and have it an internal gutter where it can be downspouted and possibly even put underground, back to the curb. But not knowing how it's framed, I don't know how deep of a gutter you could get there. I mean, it may be
You don't think
3 inches.
that taking a residential guttering, which is what, 3 inches wide at the top?
I'm sure it overflows in a heavy rain.
I would think if you put a 6-inch gutter on there with the lip up to stop the water and turn it down, that'd be a solution. My problem is I don't see how you're gonna make the owner of the property whole for his landscaping and his grass and everything that's being disturbed on the south side without the sunlight that he had a right to count on.
The other thing is, that's why if it had gutter on the house itself, just above the carport, and that was downspouted to the front, then all you're dealing with is just what water's hitting the carport, which would help, but not knowing whether that's done that way or not.
Mr. Florence.
Main thing, we have a code, and people need to abide by it. So that's the bottom line.
All right, any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Oh,
Hold your hands up. There's two,
For which,
three
which way?
opposed.
No.
3. So it's 9-3.
9-3 to table it, right?
Yes.
To defer for 60 days.
To defer for 60 days, yes.
My biggest problem.
Okay.
The permit.
Thank you. With that, we are adjourned.